Most of you know who I am. I'm Cheri Ho. I'm the curriculum advisor for the Summer Institute, part of the Tang Center Silk Road Studies. I've worked with Karen Clancy, our lovely leader, for about 20 years plus. Karen was on the school board where I was principal in Belmont Redwood Shores, and she recruited me, as she's recruited so many of us, to coach and to mentor and to work with teachers. That has been my love since I've been an administrator and a teacher for over 40 years in the district. I started when I was 16 teaching in a class. So my background has always been in education and working with students, with children. And as I gained expertise with little ones, then I started working with adults like yourselves. So today, I want you to relax, have fun. This is an experience that teachers just love. And as we know, traveling with Karen, it's always an adventure. She gives us an 11-page itinerary when we go abroad. Every minute of every day is accounted for. From 8 in the morning, meeting on the corner in London, right? At 8 o'clock, 8:30, walking to the British Library to work with the British Library, and coming home and doing things and running around and all of this. And you still have energy as teachers to go out and explore the country that you're in. We've been very, very blessed. We all know that. We are extremely grateful to UC Berkeley's connections, to the colleagues around us, to those who are visitors to our country now. Our experience of late was in Mongolia. How many teachers have an opportunity to study in Mongolia, to understand the culture, to connect with the peoples there, to understand their history, to understand where they come from, to go out into the countryside and really feel and experience nomadic life. Animals, environment, things that are important for all indigenous people who are native to the area. Those are the things that our teachers got to experience. Some of us don't teach in suburbs or in the country. Some of us teach in cities. And a lot of our students will never have that opportunity to really go out and experience something like that. But we hope, through the teaching of all of our teachers, that they will experience it. Because going abroad into Mongolia, what do? As an advisor to each of the teachers, they develop a lesson. And we work together on developing a lesson to bring Mongolia and the spirit of Mongolia into the classroom. So our 2 days of study here, can you imagine these 2 days? We do it every day for a month. That's a lot of professional development in an intense way. In Mongolia, we only had an opportunity to do just 2 weeks. But within those 2 weeks, we learned so much, because every day we were out meeting with folks. So we are grateful to the networking that we're able to do. And I always look at this group as travelers along the Silk Road. Just as we are learning from one another, exchanging ideas with one another, trading with one another, it's been an opportunity that is absolutely beyond what teachers think about. But because of Karen's vision and what she wants to do in the future and for the future, it's been 20 years. So how many teachers? 250 plus have been traveling on the Silk Road with us, exchanging ideas. Now, we have the luxury of going into your classrooms and seeing how Mongolia is, the spirit of Mongolia is intertwined with the discipline that you're teaching, which is absolutely stunning. It is my joy to see you, because I get to see your lessons when you're developing them, then I get to see you executing them, and then I get to see you improve upon all the things because you've been doing some research beyond. It inspires you to do your own professional development on your own. The other thing that is so important, besides exchanging connections, I got an email 2 days before we got here from one of the teachers that we had a discussion with at that table. And I know that Adric said, that was one of the best days, is to absolutely have an exchange with another teacher in another world and just chatting as best we could, right? And so she emailed me, and all she wrote was, "Hi, teacher, how are you?" Because she wasn't sure. I gave her my card. I'd never heard from her before. She just went ahead and emailed me. And then she sent photos of me and herself at the table discussing and exchanging. She was one of the ones that had her visa approved, and she really wanted to come. So, of course, I was so surprised. I was excited. I wrote her back right away, and I said, "Oh, I'm so glad that you wrote me, because we're getting ready to talk about Mongolia with the rest of the teachers." And I said, perhaps one of our teachers I know, David, asked me, is there a way that my students can exchange and communicate with teachers there? Can there be a pen-pal relationship? And so Karen was looking into it. Well, this just happened. What a perfect opportunity. And so I asked her, I said, "How many students do you have this year?" She wrote back, "I have 50. She's elementary school. "I have 50 students." "David, and you have 52?
52.
See, that's a story in itself, right? I'm going like, I know, doesn't. And I thought, oh, this is great. So I told David, and so David and I are going to work together with this teacher, and we're going to hopefully have our students exchange. That connection is just so key for the future, right? And it starts with a trip like this, and we think, okay, we're going to go, we're going to be adventurous, we're going to do all this stuff. And then you get there, and everybody goes, oh my gosh, this is so much work. Not that you didn't know it was going to be work, but it's physical work, it's mental work, it's emotional work throughout this journey. And some of you have been on this journey twice. You got to go with this twice. Karen and I have found out new teachers are wonderful, but there's a maturity level in understanding what this is really about. This is a study abroad more than anything. It's not a vacation. It's not just having fun. It's both. You can do both. So anyway, I'm speaking to the choir at this point, but I just know that cultural heritage and all of those things, you know, we can say what we're going to say and do what we're going to do, talking about global connections and all that. We actually live it. And we live it every day with our students. It's connecting them with not only concept and that ability to impart knowledge, but it's in the way that you do that is so key. So I just want to mention for some of you, because Karen and I have been visiting for the last 2 weeks, all of your classrooms. And so one of the Mongolian quotations that we learned, it's a proverb, a single arrow is easily broken, but many arrows together are strong. We are arrows in a quiver, marching along that Silk Road, taking our time, exchanging ideas, having conversations, and trading with those along that road. Whatever route you may take, land, sea, camel, those of us who've been on camel ride. So those are the things that are so great. But there's also a Buddhist quote that I love. If you deeply observe, everything is your teacher. And that's what teachers do. They observe their students, they observe their colleagues, they make connections with their universities, their community, with their parents. They gather the arrows to keep their schools strong and their classrooms strong and the learning strong. We are not in isolation. We really deal with everyone around us to make us who we are and those experiences. So, we are grateful to the UC Berkeley's Tang Center for Silk Road Studies, to American Center for Mongolian Studies, and for the San Mateo County for helping us organize and put all our stuff together. And that communication is really, really key. But I also know that these observations are in the following areas of expertise. And I think of us as teachers are artists, because we develop and we mold and we make and we design. That's who we are. So we're all artists here. And today you're going to do some art, so that's perfect. So Karen and I have had the pleasure to observe deeply your passionate dedication to teaching and learning, not only from Mongolia, from China as well. Some of you have been with us to Dunhuang. The results have been inspirational to both Karen and myself. I've been in the business a long time, but every year that I take trips with you guys, it's always, I learn more. The classes that you teach ranged from AP Studio Art, physics, photography, world history, geography, geology, English Lit, hobbies, games, film, animation. That's a lot of collaboration and collegial work that we do together. And then we're exhausted, we get home, we relax a little bit, go on another vacation or whatever, and then you're back in your classrooms again, preparing all this stuff. So thank you to each and every one of you who inspire us as educators and trainers for you and mentors for you. You give back so much to our lives. And that's why I was talking to Nolan. We got to keep this program going. It can't end. There's too much for us to do. So continue in the spirit of learning, and we're going to do that today. And thank you so much for all of your dedication and commitment to the program. Yes, it was great adventure, but we have seen so much growth in each and every one of you. These trips empower you to become who you really need to be. Your role is always changing, and we can see that. The leadership in this group is very compelling. So we know that we're in a safe place, and the students are going to be in a wonderful place in this world. So we're very, very fortunate. So be inspired today. Amanda's going to be speaking next, and we're going to talk about Buddhist books. And then we have the pleasure of Jillian Bowl, who's going to give us some hands-on experience in book making. So that's going to be wonderful. And then we'll have lunch and connect some more. So thank you again. Enjoy the day. And so we go on with that. All right, Amanda.
Okay, so I promised not to do a terrible, horrible, boring lecture, but I wanted to just spend a little bit of time doing what I love to do as part of this big collaborative project, which is thinking about Buddhist books in manuscript form, specifically those along the Silk Road and at Dunhuang. But also I think this is like an opportunity to think a little bit more deliberately about how to deal with religious texts or sacred texts, or we might even step back further and just say great works in the classroom and how to think about them in historical and material terms. So, what is a Buddhist book? I promise there are only a couple of these dense slides. So, there's a couple working definitions that we use in the field. So, a Buddhist book is any physical book that conveys the teachings of the Buddhist tradition, and this is called, as you may know, Buddha word teachings or Buddha vachana, to use the Sanskrit term. Buddhist books can be written in any Buddhist language, which includes English, right? So just about any language under the sun. Some Buddhist books are made specifically for use in Buddhist ceremonies, and we call those ritual manuals or handbooks, and that's actually what I work with most specifically. These ritual manuals often include pronunciation guides and sometimes musical notations for recitation, followed during the ceremonies themselves. They might also include diagrams for laying out altars. They might show detailed colored images of specific objects that are used in different rituals and so forth. And of course, many Buddhist books are illustrated with scenes from the sutras, and sutra is the Sanskrit word for Buddhist scripture. So those are scenes from the sutras. Those are the teachings of the Buddha himself that often include images of the deities that appear in those stories, their great epics and myths, their great journeys, all the protagonists in the Buddha sutras, and key moments in their narrative progression. So you see, we saw a little bit of that in some of the illustrated Lotus Sutra, the single-stitch books that I showed yesterday. So they pull out and illustrate the books where needed. So one of the things, in part because I like to work with ritual texts, is to sort of nuance the definition of a Buddhist book, not just by what it contains, but by how it is used by a Buddhist community or in a Buddhist context. So there we need to think about at least these 4 dimensions of the tradition. So oral transmission or teaching, so the use, in other words, of Buddhist scripture or Buddhist sutras in a teaching context, the writing down, the transcribing, and of the text into a written medium, and then the development and use of that object, that written object. Of course, ritual and devotional uses of Buddhist texts, and then their interpretation and their role in the formation of lineages. So that is sort of scholastic commentarial work with texts and how that works on the page, and we're going to look at some of those kinds of manuscripts, but then also how different Buddhist texts are transmitted as sacred objects that are to be held throughout one's life, sometimes carried on one's body, sometimes held in special shrines or special cases or special boxes as part of the transmission lineage itself, right, from teacher to student on through the generations. So just to kind of address quickly some of these uses, one of the main functions we see Buddhist texts playing in contemporary Buddhist communities is through sutra lectures. So these are the Buddhist scriptures that are taught by a teacher who sits on a special dais there. And before him, although we can't see it, is Buddhist scripture, and so he's flipping through the pages of that. I don't know what kind of manuscript he has, so it's probably a bound book because this is a contemporary scene. But you can see all of the students in the hall taking notes. They would have their own notebooks, and they might actually have a copy of the same text that's being taught, but they're making annotations and comments on it just like a student would in any other kind of teacher-student context. So this is probably the most common use of Buddhist texts as part of these sutra lectures. Another very old and venerable Buddhist tradition is that of sutra copying. Does anyone know why people copy Buddhist sutras? For merit, yes, you all know. Yeah, this is a tough crowd. There's no surprises. That's right. So in many Buddhist sutras, the Buddha himself or one of his interlocutors say specifically, especially towards the end of Mahayana sutras, that if you copy this text, you will gain great merit. So the copying down of the text, the transmission of the text itself became an art. So the art of copying sutras. So, and this takes on various forms in East Asia and in Tibet and in Central Asian communities. And it becomes indeed a fine art. So you see the meeting of calligraphy with Buddha's teachings and so forth. So it's very fun. And as medievalists, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of documents from the medieval period that diagram scenes of this, scenes of people copying sutras at Dharma lectures or at sutra lectures. We have manuals for the scribes who would do this professionally on behalf of the imperial houses of East Asia and so forth. So this is a big, big deal, sutra copying. And then, of course, we get sutra recitation. So this could be the recitation of an entire sutra. It could be a part of a sutra. It could just be the spell text or the mantras sections or dharani sections of a Buddhist sutra. And these this might take place on a daily basis, it might take place on a weekly basis, or according to a ritual or festival calendar, depending on the Buddhist lineage that you're working with. But the monastics really do have a daily recitation practice, and they're using really interesting versions of Buddhist sutras. Some of them are liturgical manuals, so they're made just for recitation. So you might have a monk or a nun in Japan who's reading Sinitic characters, Chinese characters, but next to it they have all of the pronunciation guides for how to say it in contemporary Japanese. And we see that kind of annotation and markup on manuscripts going all the way back to Dunhuang. So the pronunciation of Chinese is tricky, but in each region that uses Sinitic language, that is written classical Chinese, you see different methods for learning how to pronounce it. And if you go to a contemporary temple, maybe here in Berkeley, you might have the Chinese, and then you'll have like an English or a Vietnamese or Korean translation so that you can recite it at least in your head, if not aloud. And you all know why we all recite Buddhist sutras, right? Because you gain merit. Yes, this is another meritorious practice, so sutra recitation. And it's really interesting to go to temples. I've spent some time in Japan, and just the vast repertoire of memorized texts that the monks and nuns have is incredible. So you go into these into these temple complexes, and people are just reciting for hours and hours and hours and hours from memory. So this is another important point to kind of shift us for a second away from the text, which is the Buddhist tradition for hundreds of years before the first Buddhist texts were written down, was transmitted orally in good old Indian tradition. So the writing down of the text is really profound, and so that's one of the reasons why the study of early Buddhist manuscript texts is so important, because it's sort of the first layer that we have of that tradition of taking an orally transmitted tradition and putting it down on paper. So just to quickly, this is the nerd in me, I will spend a second doing this. I showed this slide yesterday, which are the main kingdoms of the Taklamakan region, so that northern and southern Silk Road. There's Dunhuang there on the right, and we have Khotan and a few other major sites there. And what's circled are the major manuscript repositories that we have to sort of build up our knowledge of early Buddhist books. And of course, what's not on this map is Gandhara, that region in modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, that we talked a little bit about yesterday. So this is really where our archive of early Buddhist books comes from, in addition to Gandhara. So one of the things that people who think about early Buddhist books think about is how many texts actually survive from an early period. And so again, these are some of the places that we have. I think the largest Buddhist manuscript repository in the world are the temple collections in Japan. So they just have thousands and thousands. And we were in Japan 2 years ago at a dinner, and they said, do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
How many manuscripts are at Dunhuang? And I said, I don't know, it's like 50,000, give or take 10,000 considering fragments. And the Japanese scholar sitting across from us at dinner said, well, we have at least 1 million. So I was like,
You win.
cool. But it is true, and I want to see them all. And they've started to digitize, like the Dunhuang, a vast majority of the Dunhuang materials have now been digitized, and so they're now starting to do that in Japan as well. And this is a bit of a trickier situation, right? So if we think about the use, or what is a Buddhist book, what is its use, how does it function within community? Dunhuang is, for better or worse, an archaeological site. It's also a UNESCO site, it's also a pilgrimage site, it's also a tourist site, and so forth. But it is not really an active Buddhist site. Japanese temple collections are part of active living monastic communities. So gaining access to those materials, and even the idea that they should be treated in a manner, as artifacts to be digitized is a big deal. So there's a big difference, right, between working with the old texts and working with old texts that are still parts of living library systems, right? So it's a very interesting thing, sort of area to think about. But this is just a sort of sense. South Asian Indian manuscripts, it's really hard to judge how many are there. And one thing we know from the field of Buddhist studies is that a lot of the earliest Buddhist texts are preserved the oldest versions of Indian Buddhist texts are preserved in Chinese translation. So a lot of the older strata of Indian Buddhist texts has been lost to time, save for its their transmission and translation into early Chinese, beginning in the first centuries of the Common Era. But millions and millions of manuscripts did survive in India, do survive in India, but it's a little hard to determine how many and exactly where they all are, never mind digitizing them all, getting access to them. So India is another big site of manuscript culture for Buddhism and other traditions. But so this is sort of like a rough sketch of where we might look and the types of numbers we might be looking at when we think of early Buddhist books. I won't do that. So what I wanted to do today is just give you a kind of show and tell of some other interesting objects from Dunhuang that touch on sort of their ritual use and the sort of creative side of early Buddhist books, and then talk a little bit about printing as a kind of prelude to the work we'll do today with Jillian. So I showed this slide yesterday, but maybe it's a little bit more impressive now that we've seen the poti that were in the library. And the examples that we looked at yesterday were all Mongolian and Tibetan manuscripts, most all in this same format, but again read in a different direction, right? So the orientation went from horizontal, which is the sort of South Asian and Inner Asian tradition, to the Chinese vertical reading. But you can see how the basic shape and the format stays the same, and hopefully yesterday you noted some of the string holes in the samples that were laid out for us by the librarian. And you can also see a little book art here on the side. So the big stack of folios has been decorated with a common Buddhist motif, this flaming jewel, here on the side of this very interesting Chinese example. So I spent a couple of months in Paris 2 years ago, and I had never seen any of these, but you may have noticed some of the boards that are ornately decorated that are used to sort of bind together or hold together the stacks of poti in the Mongolian and Tibetan tradition. And while these are not wooden boards, they're paper, and you can see that they've been ruled like the text-based pages. There are a couple of illuminated covers that I sort of found for the first time. I'm sure many other people knew about them. But you can get a sense of the level of, and the sort of motifs of the illustrations that we'd find on the paper bindings for these Tibetan manuscripts. So this is, there's no language on this text, but art historians sort of have speculated that this is somehow likely coming from a Tibetan workshop in the region of Dunhuang. Why exactly? I'm not sure. But anyway, we could debate about this. But you can see the use of color and the design. And again, it's a very interesting use of paper that had already been ruled. We talked about that a bit yesterday. So possibly they had some extra paper that had been cut to size, and they had an extra sheet or two, and so they created this sort of beautiful addition for the cover. This is another one. There are several that look like this. They're kind of a little psychedelic looking or something, right? But you can see that's that flaming jewel, the Chintamani there in the center where the string hole is. That's the same motif that is decorating that Chinese poti on both sides of the bundles. And then you can just see other common Buddhist motifs. So you see the monks, as in the previous slide. You can see identify them by their robes, which are these patchwork robes, and you see some kind of haloed figure there, maybe a bodhisattva. So there's no text here, nobody has identified this, but again, this is a ruled sheet. So, possibly this was made, cut to purpose, and then they had extra sheets remaining, and so they made these sort of ornate embellishments to the manuscript. So just to spend a little bit of time talking about ritual manuals and handbooks, again, I showed you this concertina that's got all of these wonderful additions and corrections, and it's has several pages of paper that had been repurposed to make additions and the correction sheets to this booklet. But I wanted to show you a little bit of the content that is really getting towards the use of this manual as a handbook. So this is, Buddhists have mantras and mudras, and they often will recite the mantra and make the mudras in combination to go through different steps of a meditation or a ritual. So there are these combinations of mantras and mudras. And here you get a series of mudras that are showing you how to do a ritual for the Bodhisattva Guanyin, Avalokiteshvara. And so next to, what's so wonderful about this is that it was heavily used, and you can see the highlighter marks on 3 of the 4 mantras that are placed next to each of the mantras that correspond, and they're numbered. So you can get a real sense of the sequencing of this ritual. So somebody would have intoned the mantra and then made the mudras to correspond. And so you're making some kind of contemplative offerings to Avalokiteshvara and saying certain prayers and so forth. So this is an example of a manual in action. It was copied not by a professional scribe, but by somebody who was using it. And so again, this is part of that compilation work. So somebody was picking up texts and rituals that they wanted to have in their own collection. So this is kind of like, we call this a single volume library. So this would have been in the possession of a single individual who's collecting rituals and texts and snippets of other things, sometimes adding recycled paper bits and so forth, to sort of create something that they would have carried on them or kept in their own personal library. I did show this slide yesterday, but just to give you a sense of the density of the pages. So now we're back to a poti booklet shape, and this is a Tibetan ritual manual with lots of dense commentary. So you can see there's always a layer of text, and then they're adding commentary, they're adding different ritual notes, they're adding, you see the little X's or crosses there. They're adding all kinds of notations for how to read this and how to teach it. And the Tibetan documents at Dunhuang are really fantastic because, unlike the Chinese samples that I work with, the Tibetan parallel works really show that these texts were used a lot. And so you'll get comments from the teachers talking about how you might relay this dense, arcane teaching to a student. So they're really sort of self-conscious works. So that's really interesting. And again, they use all kinds of specialized markings to sort of stay on track. If you've got a notebook and you're taking notes, by the end of the day, a session or a workshop, you're not exactly sure how the ideas all follow, but here you can get a sense of how they were making connections between texts that had been added to the original folios. Another big subset of materials that we find at Dunhuang are commentarial and scholastic manuscripts. So just to give you a sense, this is the kind of diagram that would likely have been used in some kind of monastic curriculum at the site. And so this is a table which is laying out the 5 divisions of the Yogacara path, the Buddhist practice, presented in the Changwei Shelun, which no one cares about, but this is a very dense text. And this chart, this diagram, is also very dense, but if you actually go through the text, which a couple of us did, and look at the way they've diagrammed it, it's extremely helpful. So this is probably, this is probably earlier. I'm not entirely sure if I think this is probably 8th or 9th century. It's much earlier than the material that I typically work on. But you can already see conventions of the Chinese page being used here. You can see the circles at the top and the wide spacing, the use of blocks, and you see the ornate red guidelines, and all kinds of stuff is happening here on this page that would have been used by teachers and students back in the day. And there's a couple of these charts. They're really fantastic. Going back to a Tibetan ritual manual, here you see rubrication, the use of red and highlighter to sort of mark out important passages. And then there's been a couple of comments made under the important passages that someone went through and highlighted. So it's very similar practices to what we use today, right? And this is just really incredible because this is a surviving, okay, I want to tell you how important this is. Okay, there is this Buddhist teacher at Dunhuang who was incredibly important in the transmission of specific philosophical works. And he was born in Dunhuang, and he attained a sort of official status, a senior abbot in the region. And he has two names, Chudrup and Fachang. And no one knows, we still don't know, even though people are writing books about him, if he was born Chinese, born Tibetan, what he was, ethnically, and whether that kind of question even made sense at Dunhuang in the 9th century, because the Tibetan Empire had expanded and taken control of Dunhuang, and Dunhuang was kind of a contested space for a long time. But Fachang was taking important works that were transmitted from India to China, and he was translating them from Chinese into Tibetan, and he was translating works known from India to Tibet into Chinese, and he was also producing bilingual editions of very important texts, and he was also writing commentaries on these very important texts. And the reason this manuscript is so important is because it's probably an autograph manuscript, meaning he wrote this. So you can see his annotations, and so this would be like finding a first edition of like Shakespeare with written in his hand or something like this, right? And so there are a few of these manuscripts, and mostly the Japanese scholars fight over whether this is actually his hand or not, and everyone seems to agree that this was written by Fachang or Chudrup. Okay, and you can see all the layers of commentary here, and you see the use of red, and we saw that on the potis in Mongolia and Tibetan yesterday. There are certain key sections which are printed or written in red ink, which is juxtaposed against the black ink for various purposes. So this is just this really incredible piece of history. And some of the ritual manuals I work with are the Chinese tantric materials. And again, you can just see all kinds of interesting things happening on the manuscript with the use of red versus the black. And so basically you see kind of verbal notations being used for which they're using the red ink. So at the beginning of each of the mantras, which are written in black, somebody's added in Chinese in red, say, namaha, which is like homage to or whatever, right? So they're giving you verbal cues. So maybe this was actually used in one of the daily recitation practices at a local monastery or something like that, because you have the liturgical cues written in red. This is another thing that we see very commonly in the ritual manuals, is just this great use of highlighters and punctuation and text division marks. So this is just a sort of assemblage from the manuscripts that I've worked on. So they're highlighting the title, they're highlighting the name of the translator's colophon there, and then they use the seal. We haven't found any of these seals, that none survive as far as we know, but they would have had little wooden carved proto-xylographs, something like that, that they would have dipped in this red ink, but sometimes they probably, it looks like, dipped it in black ink, and so sometimes it looks a little purplish or a little brown, and so you see all kinds of interesting things happening. And by the way, most of these Chinese works from this period, this is the 9th and 10th centuries of Dunhuang, were probably written with a pen and not a brush, because this was the convention after the Tibetan occupied the site. And you can see some of the more ornate highlighters there that look like vajras, or again, that chintamani, that flaming jewel motif. And these are just a few of the different samples from the same manuscript that use that same little wooden seal, which is a vajra, right? And just more like this is also Chudrup Fachang's student's text. So he was taking notes while Fachang was giving a lecture at Dunhuang. And we have rough ideas of the dates and locations of these lectures. And he lectured on a couple of really important Buddhist sutras. And so his students were taking notes and sort of writing what became like a classic commentary on some very important works. And they're doing that, like they're scribbling down notes and making some additions in between the lines, but afterwards they went back through their notes and classified which layer of the commentary was most important and what comes in different orders, using different notational signs, or I guess you call them signs. So you see something that looks like a kind of flower motif or a lotus, and then just circles, and it just keeps going on and on and on, and you see the script going around where they're making notes. And some of these notebooks, based on Fachang's lectures, are written in a combination of Chinese and Tibetan. So maybe they're writing down what he's saying in Chinese, but all the notations are in Tibetan and so forth. It's another kind of ritual manual that I work with, which is, again, not just like the mudra manual, but this is the full body. So you could also talk about putting yourself in a mudra, which is to put your full body in a position. And then they're giving you the sequencing. And at points, they're making notations about what this is. And you can see it in certain parts of the manuscript. And this is this huge 6-sided, 3 sheets, double-sided each. So 6 sides of this huge diagram of these meditative positions or ritual positions. And they're marking little groupings of deities that go together and so forth. So this is the kind of stuff we see at Dunhuang. And this is the kind of stuff you still see today. Nothing that I've shown you here would be strange in a monastery today, anywhere in the Buddhist world. But just slightly different versions, and probably not written by hand, but written or printed up officially, but with all the same kinds of notations and highlighters and use of alternating ink colors. So to skip ahead now, I wanted to just go back a little bit to the history of Buddhist printing. The Buddhists were printing before anyone else, so by the early 7th century, we have prints coming from Korea and Japan in the form of printed dharanis, these mantras, that were printed on long sheets of paper and rolled up and deposited in little stupas, these little reliquaries. So the oldest printed texts we have are coming from Korea and Japan, and they're Buddhist spells, Buddhist prayers. So that's a lot earlier than the Western. So if you look up online, what's the history of printing, you're going to see a story that begins several centuries later in another part of our Eurasian map. So yesterday we talked briefly about the oldest dated printed book. So that's a lot of qualifiers there, but it's still interesting. So by 868, we already have surviving copies of the Diamond Sutra, which is one of the core Mahayana Buddhist sutras. And here you already see a fully developed format. So you don't just see a kind of rudimentary printing of the text. No, you see a fully fleshed out concertina booklet with illumination at the front, in the frontispiece. So you see the whole production is already in place by this period. So this is really early and really important for the history of print technology. And again, there are many other copies of printed Diamond Sutras from Dunhuang that span from the 868 period all the way through the closure of the Dunhuang library cave. So they continued to print the Diamond Sutra using different formats and different techniques. So again, the great thing about the Chinese manuscript and print tradition is that they use dated colophons. So we have dates for all this material, right? So it's really helpful. Now, how did they do all this? They use what we call wood blocks or xylographs, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, and we get to use one, I think, ourselves. So they would carve the characters into the wood block, and I will let Jillian talk more about the techniques because it is really mind-blowing if you think about carving. Just imagine yourself carving even a single character crudely, let alone like thousands of characters of a sutra in beautiful detail, right? And so this is just an example of a Buddhist xylograph and the techniques, so just a little detail of how intricate the work is. And you would then apply ink to it, and we'll, I think, watch a video and then do it ourselves, apply ink to the block, and then you put the paper down. And there's all kinds of techniques, and we'll go through them today. But it's just this incredible process that, again, was already fully functional by the 9th century. And many of you, I don't know if anybody's been to Haeinsa in South Korea, but they have a complete set of the Buddhist canon xylograph blocks. So they have, does it say? Oh yeah, I wrote it. 80,000 wood blocks that date from between 1237 and 1248. So that's incredible. So all the Buddha sutras that were gathered together as the canon have been carved there. And they do still use them for special occasions. They'll make special printings. And they also have to do repairs on them, right? So you have to maintain them just like we were talking about yesterday in the conservation lab. these kinds of wooden blocks, they need to be maintained. And that process is really fascinating. You can find videos on YouTube, like what happens if you chip off a character or something, you get a mistake. So they have techniques for repairing as well. Now, just in closing, I just wanted to show you like my own little pet project with printing. I never really thought about printing. I was always into handwritten manuscripts, but I live in Toronto, Canada, and at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, in all of Canada, down the street from me, there's one Dunhuang document in the whole country, and it is this beauty. So I think I showed this yesterday, but this is a print carved in the year 947 by a local ruler in Dunhuang. His name is there. The name of the carver, the engraver, is also included in the text below. And I went to visit this piece, and you can see a lot going on here. So you can see there are pinholes along the edges, and you can see it's not like the most elegant print. You know, you can see some of the woodblock, but not all of it. So was that a mistake or intentional? There's something a little bit off about the text block at the bottom, and it's a little fuzzy in places. So I thought, I don't know. And the curator said, we traded it for some belt buckles at the British Library, 70 years ago, and now we have it. And I was like, okay, yeah, well, okay, I love Dunhuang, but this thing, I don't know. But then I started to dig, and it brought me to this idea about how these prints, these single sheet prints, were used sort of as displays of devotion, and how they were creatively reusing not just woodblocks, but the finished sheets. So, again, I started digging, and I found many, many copies of this print that still exist in all the different Dunhuang collections. And I sort of started to line them up, and you can see some really radically different interpretations or uses of the woodblock. And sometimes you see just the text block, and sometimes you see just the image block, so we know these were two separate blocks, which is already an interesting feature, which is a little bit distinctive amongst the Dunhuang prints. Most are a single block with two registers. You can see some hand painting of some of the samples. You can see some cutting up and collaging of some of the prints. You can see the addition of tabs for hanging on some of the samples. So this just became this very interesting project to figure out why, what are they doing with these prints? And then I found out there were bundles and bundles of many other prints dedicated to other deities. So this is another big deity, Vaishravana. And you see some of the same stuff happening. And there's another set dedicated to Manjushri. You see collaging, you see some hand coloring, you see some bad prints, you see some good prints. And I started to put together a big chronology. And this is really fun just for people who like to think about Dunhuang. And yesterday there was this thing about how, why did Dunhuang close, the library cave close, and when did it close? But we're not sure about that. But what you can see is just, if you think about, because we have the date in the text block, roughly when these were printed up, right, and when they were likely stored in the cave, okay, how many years we're talking about. So how long they probably circulated, and that's how we might account for all those changes and modifications and reuses that we saw. And then you think, how long did they probably hang out in Cave 17 in the library cave? Almost 1,000 years. And then you think, how long have they been out in the world now since their discovery in 1900? So it's a really neat chronology to think about the different uses and the repurposing of not just the manuscripts, but the prints themselves. So at the Royal Ontario Museum, we went to the conservation lab, and they did all kinds of interesting things with us. So we were trying to figure out, are these holes really pinholes, tack holes or whatever? So we determined, yes, the holes go for, something pushed through from the front, and so they were affixed to a wall. And you find many of these, because some of these holes are just from use and tearing and whatever. But we did show that there is strong evidence that all of the prints were hung up on walls. So we might imagine, it's Lunar New Year now, Spring Festival, there's all kinds of prints that come out at this time of year, so it might have been something like that. And this is just this strange, I don't know if you remember this, Sandra, we saw this in Paris. This is a hand-colored print, the same as the one in Canada. but it has this strange face, right? It looked much less strange in person, I have to say. It didn't look anything like this in person. But anyway, so for like a year, I was looking at this thinking, what in the world is this? But anyway, so this is an example of a modification of the print that likely would have been used to hang on some special occasion. And, I don't know, my grandparents for years had like calendars from like a local gas station from like the 1940s or whatever hanging in their garage because my grandmother liked the images. So the text block, again, is written, was commissioned, it dates, a local ruler at Dunhuang, it names the engraver. But they might have, just kept it for the image, and some of them did cut the text block out, right, and used them to make collages. So, these are just some of the ways we might think about how they use them. And here's one, and I'm quickly wrapping it up, but you can see the image which has been hand-painted in the middle. And they've used recycled paper from an astrological handbook to create a kind of like hanging scroll format. So they're mimicking the reuse of this image of Guanyin or Avalokiteshvara and in the manner of like a hanging banner or a hanging scroll. But they're using recycled paper. And so it's very fun because you can see around the borders what the text was and a date. So again, the Chinese and the dates, very, very good. And in addition on the sample, even though it has this kind of messy composition with this other extraneous text, whoever did this has named themselves and written a little new prayer on the side, which is highlighted in red there.
How big are they?
Huh?
How big are they?
Okay. Yeah, 43 by 26. So they're not tiny. Yeah. And you can see again the pinholes or whatever that was used to hang them and lots of wear in those holes. So it's very interesting. And finally, just the examples that have these paper tabs that were added. They're not actually loops, they're just strips of paper. So you might imagine you could stick like a bamboo rod or something and hang them that way. So they're mimicking that type of hanging technique, but they're just tabs. So you can see, at least in the center there, like a pinhole, right? So they're mimicking fabric or textile banners and hanging scrolls and things in the paper format, which is also neat. And so this raises all kinds of questions about, who was purchasing these or reusing them? Did they buy them at a stall, at a festival? Did they go to a print shop and have them made up from a block that they knew was at the site? Were these sort of people with artistic aspirations but not a big budget enough to buy silk and so forth? So all kinds of interesting questions. And just to give you some comparison, so this would have been, you can see the three hanging tabs at the top of these silk portable paintings. So this was clearly the model for the modification of some of the prints, right? So this is, and that's a whole other dimension of Dunhuang, which are the portable paintings. So. And this is just, some of them are modified also to look like these banners. Usually, Buddhist banners are made of linen or they're made of silk, and these are made out of paper. So they're, again, it's maybe a less expensive version of the finer banners that were hanging in the sort of elite monasteries or institutions. These may have been used in personal shrines or in homes even. And finally, we see just a couple of examples of them also using paper, but colored paper with design to look, again, like the fine silk banners with the registers at the top and bottom, and lots of hand-painted images. So that's what I wanted to share. Yeah.
So this afternoon, we have two folks you know already, most of you, but I just want to give a little bio, just for some of you who don't know them. We have Leslie Alpert and Heidi Uyloan to do some presentations this afternoon and engage us in some learning in cohorts. So Leslie Alpert is a history social science teacher from Southern California, currently in her 23rd year of teaching. Yay! Throughout her career, she has taught a variety of subjects and mentored teachers, served as a WASC leader, and currently is the department chair of her school and social science, right. She has participated in several professional development programs, most notably the Fulbright Hays program in 2018 and 2024. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her family, of course, and traveling, trying out new recipes, can't wait, and listening to audiobooks. So thank you, Leslie, for coming today to share. And then Heidi. Heidi, with 23 years at Poway Unified School District, both as an English teacher and as a teacher librarian. She has leveraged her experiences traveling with the Tang Center of Silk Road Studies to expand library programming, social studies curriculum, and students learning about the richness of the Silk Road network. So I'm very pleased to have them do a presentation for all of us and then engage us in more learning. Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you, everybody. This is going to be a kind of like coming back to and discussing what we have learned or implemented in our class and what we've learned from those lessons. And so Leslie and I are going to kind of just overview what we did. And we know that you guys listened to our presentations before, but we have some different audience members, so we might do a couple new things. And so welcome teachers from our China Summer Institute and our London Summer Institute, and then our most recent Mongolia Summer Institute.
So we just put in some images, some happy moments that you tried to get everybody in. But we have our London crew enjoying a soccer match at our pub, yes. Rainy day, rainy days in London. We have our Mongolia crew in a very full elevator. And then out in the countryside, and then we have our lone China crew member, Amy McCoy. Yes, from last night. So we had to get her in.
Not in China.
Not in China. Yeah. This is literally from last night. And so we thought, because we're from such diverse, different programs, some of us know each other, some of us don't. We thought it'd be nice to just take a moment, just go around the table really fast. Your name, your subject, your grade, the program you attended, and then optional, a funny, heartwarming, or auspicious moment that you had while in your program. And something while you're thinking about it, I'll give you some think time. I know I've said to like Cheri and Karen, like, I really feel like this is like a family reunion. I mean, I've never met Amy, and I feel like we just became instant besties because we all are connected through this program, through these wonderful and amazing women. And I saw, I don't think David has ever met Andrea before. Right? This is your and I just saw you guys all chatting and helping each other out, and it's like, and I think it speaks to like who we are as teachers, to our wonderful leaders who chose and selected these amazing people. So if you can, think about that for just a moment, and I guess I can start, so I'll give you a little more think time. So my name is Leslie. I currently teach AP Human Geography. I teach World History and Ethnic Studies. I have attended 3 programs, so I'm tied with a couple of people. I went to 2018 to China and Mongolia. I just got a random email from the Getty that said, hey, you want to do this? And I said, okay, and I just typed in an application, and then they selected me. And then I got an email again in 2023 saying, hey, you want to go to London with us? And I said, okay. and then they reached out and said, we're going to Mongolia, you in? And I was like, sure, I'm in. Tag me in, coach. So it's hard to choose one funny, heartwarming, auspicious moment, but I think one moment that really stood out to me is visiting the Velu Foundation in Mongolia and seeing the children. It was very, very touching.
And just hearing the programming that they're doing for the children who are really underserved, and the efforts that they're making to try and, bring light to their lives, and I thought it was really, really touching, and the kids were great. So that's my heartwarming moment.
Okay, so you already heard my bio, but so I'm a teacher librarian in middle school, and so I my first trip was London, which was really amazing, and I owe that to Amy, because Amy McCoy invited or sent along the application to me, and I was like, my kids are old enough. Peace out, I'm leaving. So that was really, really great, and I really just, that experience was life-changing for me and really touched my nerdy librarian side, where I could just study and be a student and learn, and then take that learning back to the classroom. And then, of course, I was invited to go to Mongolia, which was a totally different kind of trip, but equally as rich. So I'd say a funny moment, I would say, is I remember we went out one night in London. I think we went to a play or something. And we were like, it's not gonna rain. It's not gonna rain. That was your story? Okay. And of course we walk everywhere. So it starts pouring, and we just are walking home just dripping wet, and we're just coming in through the lobby, and it was just like funny. It wasn't cold, so it was just hysterical. We're just like, whatever, we're wet. So that was it.
So really fast, something I forgot, something that I also remembered was, and thanks to Amy Baus, is always having snacks. And when she presents, Amy is amazing at always bringing snacks. And then one thing I remember about London is we always went to the markets, and I brought for us to munch on some shortbread cookies. So, right? So this was something that we would always go to the market. So feel free to enjoy a little bit.
Have a biscuit.
Yeah, have a biscuit in memory of being in London. And then we have our stroop waffles as well.
So our agenda for today, we're going to kind of skip around a little bit. First, we're going to, Leslie and I are going to kind of go over what we did in our classrooms from our experiences in London. And half of you already experienced that lesson. So we're just going to kind of review what we did, what worked well, what didn't, and then we're going to give you time to share out, because we want to hear what you guys ended up doing in your classroom, because what you planned in the trip isn't necessarily what happened. And so just having that time to share and reflect together and learn from each other. Then we'll go back to Mongolia. Leslie will talk about her lesson, I'll talk about my lesson, and then we'll do our discussion again. And that way, our teachers who didn't attend one or the other are still kind of participating in that discussion or learning from each other. Okay.
Thank you. So we chose this picture as kind of like a visual to remind us of our time in London. You can see the paper, I don't know if that was paper or silk banners. I think they were silk. So this is at the British Museum. And so just seeing these priceless works of art in person. Obviously we're wearing masks due to the sensitive, nature of these items. So it was just, I think, kind of captures what we experienced. And just again, going behind the scenes, being with these professionals in the field, taking time to teach me, Leslie Alpert, like nobody from Southern California. I mean, it was just amazing to have to get that, to experience that. And so just again, a couple more images to share with you. This one's at the British Library. They're taking out these scrolls. And again, I think the Diamond Sutra was resting. We did not get to see the diamond. She was taking a break. She had been out, and it was time for her to take a nap. So we did not get to see the Diamond Sutra. But they brought out all sorts of goodies for us while we were there. We had wonderful hosts at the British Museum, the British Library.
Now it's at the bottom right is Oxford.
Oh, yeah.
We're looking at the Stein collection.
Yeah, just amazing. So what I took away from this is I was developed Introduction to Buddhism lesson. And so for me, the way I think of it is like, what can you bring back to your students? What can you bring back to your peers, your colleagues? So my lesson was designed for ninth grade students who might have zero knowledge of Buddhism. So I needed to give them like a very intro to Buddhism. So that's kind of the lens in which I developed my lesson. And I think you can definitely take this lesson that I created and then adapt it. So if you have any middle school social science teachers, I feel like this could be something that you take back to them. If you teach AP World or have colleagues who are in AP World, I think you certainly like level it up and have it connect to Silk Roads, Buddhism, the Chinese dynasties. And then I used it for AP Human Geography. I used it for the unit on culture and then the idea of universal religions. But I think you can adapt it to any of these other contents, and maybe there's other contents that you're thinking of that I haven't even thought of. So feel free to share out if there's something that you think you can use it in that's not listed here as well. So bringing Buddhism to the classroom, this was a source that we had the pleasure of viewing. And so it's kind of the inspiration for my lesson. So I'll kind of walk you through how I developed it. So just kind of very simple, like KWL chart. What do you know about Buddhism? What do you want to know? What have you learned? So maybe like some questions, and then post-learning after they've done this lesson, just to get them thinking. And then we did a reading on Buddhism. So I used the British Library's resources, and I adapted it. And so they read, marked, and annotated the text. They each had the different branches of Buddhism. So we had a group reading the Mahayana, the Theravada, and the Vajrayana. And so then they had to jigsaw and then come together and kind of trace where each branch migrated to. And so then they came together and like shared kind of the basic tenets. And I have a reading and a document that goes with that. So this lesson took about 3 days. Being in AP, we're on a very tight schedule, so I would have loved to expanded it to, obviously a week, 2 weeks, but we have to finish a lot of our content, before the AP test. So if I were to do this again, or when I do this again, I might do some of this after the AP test when we have more time and I can do it more justice. But again, I'm kind of squeezed for time with the deadline of the AP test. And so kind of looking at some images from the British Library, kind of having them look at visual information, and then just having them think about it, notice the details, any questions. Then they're pair sharing and partnering up with a buddy. So this is kind of the steps. We read together, we annotated the Introduction to Buddhism. We created expert teams on their school of Buddhism. So each team was assigned one of the schools of Buddhism. And then they had to share out and then again jigsaw their school of Buddhism with the other members who didn't have that school of Buddhism. And then they completed their KWL chart and then shared out. So the reading itself took pretty much like a whole day on its own. So I have the student handouts. So this will all be available to you if you want to take this back to your your colleagues or yourself. So again, this is adapted from the International Dunhuang program. And again, kind of a mapping activity. Now I could totally see you guys doing something super cool where you actually use Google Maps and you, drop pins in and do something really awesome. But again, me being pressed for time, I just kind of did a very basic, document like that. And so kind of the chart kind of comparing the cultural hearth, the practices, and then the path to enlightenment. And then a mapping activity, and they're supposed to, again, use different colors to indicate where each branch migrated to. So and then that's later. So that's the they do lesson. Okay, and then they had to present their school of Buddhism. Sorry, okay. So part of this involves kind of me tying back to my experience in the Mogao cave. So I was able to go to Dunhuang 2018. So I gave them information about that trip. And then something that really So in 2018, we saw these beautiful Buddhas and the wall, the cave art. And then we saw the real deal in the British Library. And so I was like, what? Like, to have that experience, like see it on the wall and then see it in the British Library, the stencil that they made, it just spoke to me. So I was very inspired by, I guess, having seen it in the caves itself. And so we talked about the Mahayana Buddhism. Copying sutras or producing images of the Buddha can give you merit. And so how did they do all these, this wall art in the dark, in a cave, right? So how are they producing this art? Well, I told my students they had these stencils. And so they had to create their own Buddha. And so we also saw the stencil as well. So this is the original. And then you can see the Buddha with the holes, like the pinholes. And so what they would do was they would take the pinholes and on the ceiling just make a stencil, right, with like maybe soot or like powder. And then from there they were able to make all the different Buddhas on the wall. So that was how they were able to make the cave art. And so what I did, and when I say I had my husband do this, I had him digitize it. So he digitized the stencil, and then we made a real stencil. So I made a stencil, and I was in my room in London, in my dorm in London, with a push pin, and I push pinned the whole thing 20 times. So by the end, I had a blister on my thumb, so I had lots of merit. And then we tried it out, and it actually worked. So that was kind of the outline. And then when I came home, I up-leveled it even more, and instead of push pins, I went to the more improved version with a Cricut machine. So we Cricketed machined this. And I have the stencil, so if anybody wants to have the file, I can give you the file. But I feel like this would be cool to do in the library, right?
I have a Cricut.
Yeah, you have a Cricut. I can give you the file. To tie in with your Buddhism lesson for your 7th grade, 8th, 6th grade teachers. So you have that. And then if you want, I also have, now you don't have to do it, it's your choice, but I also have some paper, so if you would like, you can try it out. And I only brought 2 of these are bingo dabbers. Okay, so they work great. So if you want to try it out, you can bingo dab, and you can you make your own stencil. And then after that, I had the students, so they'll have dots, and then they design and they create their own Buddha. And then in my classroom, I have it lined up on the walls, and I want to, in a perfect world, I would like to eventually recreate a Buddha cave in my classroom until the fire marshal tells me you can't put stuff on the ceiling. So as soon as that fire marshal comes, then it's always a fire marshal, right? You can't put too many things up on the wall. But so that's my next phase, is to eventually have the walls kind of covered in this cave art. So I will pass it down. Feel free to take, not take, do whatever you want. But that was my Buddha lesson. And then at the end, after they do this, then they had the boring part, which is they have to do a test. So it's part of the AP test. So they had to have a stimulus, and then there's questions that correspond to what's required on the AP test. So some of the thinking skills on the AP test are fairly easy, and then there's different levels of questioning. So some are just identify the thinking skills, identify. Some are explain a limitation, analyze the extent to which. And so they have to do 21 short answers in 75 minutes to pass, and then there's a multiple choice test as well. So I mirrored some of the language on the AP test using this map. So this is, again, this theoretically should take me, like, if I'm cutting it close, like 3 to 4 days. But you could definitely see it being expanded if I had time. So that's my Buddha lesson that I got from China 2018 and then London 2024. So kind of combined both those lessons, both those experiences to create this lesson. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Any questions or?
So Leslie, I have a question.
Yes.
So, have you done this lesson this year again?
No, I have not done it
Okay.
this year, but I plan on doing it after the AP test.
So what would be some of your takeaways from that lesson? Like, are there things that you would change or maybe go?
Yeah, I feel like I did not do it justice because again, I'm pressed for time. So that's why I think when I do it, I'm going to do it after the AP test when I can really, teaching Introduction to Buddhism in 3 days, that's like insane, right? So I think to do it justice, I would probably do it after the AP test so that I can not rush through it as much. And then I think also, I have students who are Buddhists, and I think for them, it's like might be the first time that their faith has been really heard, because there's such a, we live in a, Christian-dominated religion, in America tends. So I think, honoring that experience for them and giving them, not 3 days, right? Let's recognize that. So that's something I would probably want to do next time. Yeah, thank you. Right.
So after London, my lesson was comparing fables along the Silk Road. And so I was inspired by all the texts that we were exposed to. And what I really wanted to focus on for our students for middle school is to some way make them understand the interconnectedness of different cultures. And there was these similarities between these fables from different regions along the Silk Road. So I thought that was an excellent vehicle, as Dr. Goodman said yesterday. I thought that was a really great phrasing, vehicle to kind of express that idea. And so first we went over identifying the characteristics of different fables. So I had to research fables from all these different regions and ones that were similar. So that took me a really long time, and luckily I had a month in London to do it because it took me a long time. And then, so when we did the lesson, I modeled the activity, what I wanted with the fable Tortoise and the Hare. And then I did group work. So the students then would analyze the fable, and we talked about, different characters, what are the morals. And then we had students kind of do a walkabout after their group work and think about the similarities and also how different regions had pretty similar fables and how did that happen, right? So it's evidence of the transmission of ideas. So that was really neat. For me as a librarian, I'm at a place now in my career where I can ask teachers, hey, can I do a lesson? And they say, sure, here's my class, and so that's great. I have a lot of, I have an ability to execute things or do lessons with teachers because I've built that rapport. And so one of the takeaways, the ahas we had with that was, I taught this lesson about fables with language arts, but then our language arts teacher also teaches social studies. And they're like, well, what else do you know? Do you want to do a lesson on the Great Wall? How about this? I'm like, sure, let's do it. So that was really cool, is to then have more opportunities to expand on my learning, or my teaching of the Silk Road. I also had an opportunity in the library to kind of enhance that experience for our sixth graders. So we made it into a whole thing. I kind of went overboard, but we made it into a whole thing where it was almost kind of like a museum, where it was storytelling along the Silk Road. And this is where I really benefited from working with all of you, is that I took basically all your ideas and used pieces of them to create a mini museum in the library. So then Kimberly's like, hey, this book's really great. We're going to do this book. And we promoted it, and we got an author visit. And then I was like, well, there's all this cool games, so we're going to have a section on games. And we did silkworms, and we did all these things. And so it was a lot. And then we also did a huge map with the fables and little icons and showing how the fables transmitted across the Silk Road. So the takeaway for me was that the library, yes, there's a teaching aspect for me, but the library is also used as a way to enrich that learning. The students aren't getting the in-depth experience or the time to sit with that information. So it's really a tool for me to dive deeper into that content. So just wanted to show you some pictures of what we did in our library. So you can see the students, they're looking at the displays. This was, I wouldn't recommend this.
I remember this.
I mean, you got to take care of these things every day, and they poop a lot. So, a lot. But it was really cool because you think like kids all see these things all the time, but they don't. And they're like, what is this? And this turns into this. And it was like the whole life cycle, and it was like a whole science thing. And it was just things you take for granted that kids are exposed to. They're not always exposed to. So that was really cool. And then everybody got like a cocoon to take home, and they were hatching them, and it was like a whole thing. So that was cool. We had a calligraphy lesson in London, and so I brought that back and did that with our students. We used the theme of storytelling to tell the story about how silk was made, and then I also then purchased a bunch of books about all the fables along the Silk Road from different countries, and then this is our author visit on the lower right. And then I also displayed a lot of artwork of the fables from the ancient Silk Road stuff. So there was a way to really expand all of that in the library, which was really cool. So here's my ambition. This is what I was going to do after London, but I probably did a third of that because we did a really great Islamic geometric art lesson. I really wanted to do that, and I plan on doing that. I took Brian's divination dice game. We did that. Buddhist stencil art was Leslie's lesson, and I was like, yes, we're doing that. Live silkworms. Kimberly had a paper flower making idea. I was like, yeah, we're gonna do that too. And then that was like your first idea, like from the Mogao caves and stuff. And then Chinese calligraphy. So I had all these ideas for hands-on experiences with our students because the teachers don't have time to do those, but I can do those at our lunchtime with our kids. This leads us to Mongolia. Our resident photographer is not here today, but he did some amazing photography, just the movie.
Shout out, so tell him.
Yeah.
The lesson I'm sharing is actually not the lesson I presented in Mongolia. So I chose a lesson that I wanted to share that I think would be like widely available, that you could use in like a 6th grade class, a 7th grade class. I think the lesson I created was really very niche for my class. And so I wanted, teachers, we want things to be useful, right? We want to be able to bring it back to our classroom. And so something about a lot of my lessons for Mongolia is like, I can't, again, for my content, AP Human Geography, I can't spend like a month learning about Mongolia because I just don't have the time. But what I have been able to do is intersperse Mongolia where appropriate. And so when we're learning about pastoral nomadism, boom, that's when I put in, that video that is like, Sanjat, I need that video because that's perfect. When we're studying the economic sectors, I'm gonna touch back in with Mongolia and where appropriate. And so there isn't really like one lesson that Mongolia, it just kind of touches all my lessons in AP Human Geography. And so I think my students are kind of annoyed because they're like, we get it, you've been to Mongolia already, Mrs. Alpert. Like, God, like if I see you talking about coming out of Genghis Khan's crotch again, like, because we climbed up that statue. Yeah. Yes, thanks to David Pickett who took that picture for me, yeah. Yeah, but so yes, they know. So this lesson actually is something that I thought, I was like about identity. And so some classroom ideas. I think you can bring this to all classes as a beginning of the year lesson as a way for students to introduce themselves. Ethnic studies, I know identity is a major component, so I was like, you can use it for ethnic studies. For world history, Silk Road, Buddhism, Mongolian Empire. And so something, and then AP Human Geography, Physical Environment, and Culture. And so I titled this lesson something called Fly Your Flag. And so I was really inspired by the Mongolian flag. And so let's go ahead and click on it. Let's take a look. So I presented this to my students. So kind of just even getting them like, this is thinking geographically, just kind of getting them rooted in place, right? So where is Mongolia? They might not even know where Mongolia is, or they kind of know it's in Asia, right? Somewhere in Asia. So what continent, what region, what are neighboring countries? What do you know about Mongolia? And then I kind of give them, I used a lot of the photos that we took in our shared, yeah, there we go. I mean, this is like legit the actual slide that I show my students, so I didn't just, make this, for this presentation.
You have this big of a TV in your class?
What's that?
These pictures look so amazing on this massive
Yeah.
Oh, I know, yeah.
Like, I want this in my class.
I know, and so just like seeing it, I want to give them like a sense of the place, right? It's otherworldly, really. I told them, I got to stay in this Ger camp. This was the luxury one. There's our Genghis Khan statue. Got to go up there. And then Justin's photo. There's no, that's Heidi, right? Standing in front when we went to one of the temples. Yeah, Gunda, yeah. And then the square, kind of showing like urban, right? Urban is how they're a city that's, growing. But then, like if you notice, they still have the Ger camps, right? Right in the square, right? They're kind of like showing who they are. And then, again, the flag. And so just kind of a very introductory lesson. We go into like symbolism, what the flag represents, the different symbols. So each item, then we talk about the symbol, right? So we see that symbol pretty much, repeated many places throughout when we were in the trip. I just noticed it so much while we were there. And so I just kind of have them like take notes on it. And so the kids kind of understand like the importance of these symbols and what each one means. And then we talk about this, right? We talk about, flags change over time and like, what does that flag, right? For how does that strike, how does that affect you, right? And this idea that for some it represents Southern pride, whereas others it represents, a symbol of hate, and how that flag can like really portray a message. This is a former flag of Mississippi. And then I teach them that, they decided that flag no longer represented them, right? And they eventually voted, and this is the new flag of Mississippi. And it was kind of this cool, moment where they submitted flags, they submitted designs, they voted on it as a state, and then this was the new flag of the state of Mississippi. And so I wanted them to think about, for them, like flags can represent who you are, your beliefs, your values, and that flags change, right? Your values change. And then also flags don't have to be rectangular. So the flag of Nepal, I thought was like something cool for them to see. And then I tasked them with different jobs. So imagine you're redesigning the flag of the United States, just like, the state of Mississippi redesigned their flag. What would you choose to represent America?
Dumpster fire.
What's that?
What?
Create a flag that represents the identity of the United States. Be intentional with the shape of your flag, the colors, the symbols, a motto or slogan. Then I said, okay, well, maybe, scaling it down. Maybe I teach at Santiago High School. What would be a flag to represent our school? What are the values of our school, right? Who are we as a school community? And then if they wanted to, the option 3 was choose a flag that represents you. What would you choose to represent your identity? So again, kind of just giving them that option of choice. And so then one physical flag. So I was, they could do it digitally. If you have a student who likes to sew, paint, whatever they wanted to, they could do and then a presentation on it. And so a little grading scale. And so I just brought some samples of some of the flags. The student did a flag for themselves, and I think it was, cat. And then this one I thought was really cool. This student is from Vietnam, so they have the 3-striped Vietnam from southern Vietnam. And then the rice, I guess rice is very important to them, a bowl of rice. And then just they were very thoughtful with the colors and their symbols. So this was their personal flag. There's another example of a personal flag to represent, who they are. I thought it was just a great representation. I like she put in her glue gun because she likes to craft places that she's visited, places where she wants to go. And I think in the beginning of the year, this is a great activity for a kid to share, And then this one to represent who we are. This one shows our school. I have 4 rectangles for the 4 grades, right? That's so clever, right? It was just like they put a lot of thought into it and creativity. And then this one chose America, and a lot of them, I was kind of a little bit nervous about this one given our current state, but it went well. And so I just thought, the Statue of Liberty, right? Just liberty, and so, enduring hope. And then they wrote Guided by Liberty. So I thought that was just really great. And this wasn't even a lesson that I had thought of. My lesson, when I did do my Mongolian lesson, but this one was just like, this is like a side one. Like let me throw in a side one. And I actually just ended up really liking this lesson. I tried it out with my AP Human Geography students. I tried it out with my Ethnic Studies students. And I think it's like a good lesson that could just fit anywhere, right? So I think it's universal, and that's why I wanted to show it, because, you could use it in a 6th grade class, a 10th grade class, and and fit it in where you can. And then they're also learning about Mongolia. So Mongolia's really been infused in my my teaching. So that's my Mongolia lesson. Thank you. Thanks.
So I decided to continue my theme of showing how something is evidence of cultural exchanges along the Silk Road. So last year was fables, this year was games. And I was really inspired by all the hands-on experiences we've had. And so we spent a lot of time learning with all these games, and specifically with the Shagai bones, and how it was something so simple as a little game had so much meaning and cultural relevance. And so I used that as sort of like my catalyst and my model for my game. So my lesson was super ambitious because I only get like an hour. So I'm like, we're learning about all the games on the Silk Road and doing stations. So, and it was crazy, but we did it. So I picked games throughout the Silk Road network, and then I also displayed in the library like the same thing, but this time the focus was on games instead of storytelling. And so what we did was I modeled with our best friends that we had so much fun with on our trip, which were the bones. So we'll kind of I'll show you just real quick what we did with just this, because for our friends that were not with us, this is going to be totally new for them. And so I started the lesson with talking about Mongolia, and then all the kids had a bone they held in their hand, 4 sides, and what the relevance of those 4 sides were, because interesting, as you can see, when students have items that they can hold, they get really excited, right? And this isn't the game, but this was a way for me to introduce Mongolia. And also what we did was, then I had a similar station that students would go to, and they would, one of them was knuckle bones, which is from ancient Greece. And so after we kind of went over Mongolia and talked about what the pieces represent, of what are they made of, why are they made of this, How is it played? What might the game reveal about the culture and the values? And so there was some front-loading of information before this. But the main thing I wanted to show was the transmission of ideas. And so I had a map, and each game had a symbol, so each station had a symbol. So then they would mark where Shigai started, and then in the text it will say where it was transmitted. Then they went to the next station, and it might be a different game, or it was similar. We had knuckle bones, and they start making this connection, like, oh, this is the same thing. It's bones. It's a different game, but it's from Greece, and the origin says it's spread, right? And so the game kind of, or the usage of the bones, sort of transfers ideas, transfer change, or whatever. Because Shigai has over 80 games that you can play with it. And so that was a really great way to, the kids would read information about the game, but also how and where it's spread to, and then we're tracing that along their maps to make this connection of the transmission of ideas in the Silk Road. So that was like a super ambitious lesson, and it was really fun. And so, like I said, last year we did fables, and so now I have another lesson in our repertoire in the library to do. And so I would say the takeaways was, again, we had displays out with books, and then I also let the kids check out the games during lunchtime. So we didn't have enough time to play every game, but then they were able to come back into the library, take the game, and then learn more about it and learn how to play it. I also took away, like, okay, I probably wouldn't write a whole paragraph or a page worth of information this time because it's middle school. And it's yeah. So I was going to do bullet points and info. Some of the kids were really upset they couldn't play the whole game and learn about it all in 10 minutes. But it was a tangible way for me to show the transmission of ideas. I really liked that. I was pressed for time for doing like a close and an EQ question, and that's just part of the gig for me, is like I get very limited time to really make a big impact. So yes, I would maybe spend 2 days doing this and spending a little more time on the content of everything. But also it's just a lesson that I can fit anywhere in the ancient civilizations curriculum because it doesn't focus on just one thing. But Mongolia is used as like a launching pad for that. So I'm just going to do a shameless plug also to remind you guys that if you do have a teacher librarian, that you are using them because they are there to help you. And so things that you can and should be asking for, even if you think it's a no. So what we do, Cheri, I can all do, is we do teach lessons using databases. So a lot of you mentioned research and doing those things. That's what your librarian can teach, how to do different research on those databases. And your districts and your state gives you money for free databases, and you have access to those things. We curate sources for lessons and units, so if you need more articles or leveled text for Mongolia or anything else, you can ask for those. Use the library space to spread out your classes. That's like the #1 way that I've been able to reach teachers is I say, hey, you need room? Okay, just use the space. And then that opens the door to building those relationships and collaborative opportunities. So also collaborate, team teacher, assist teacher. Sometimes I'm just an extra body helping people in the classroom, and that's also what my job is. Curate books just to have in your class for that unit. So if you are doing a unit where you want to study the geographical environments or whatever, request some books for your classroom. Also purchasing books and resources for your unit. I have teachers that say, hey, I want to do this unit. Do you have resources for this? And I will try to find money or ask people for money. And, I always say it doesn't hurt to ask, even if it's no, because it was no to begin with, right? So nothing changes. So I just want to kind of plug that you guys are reaching out to your resources, even if you're like, oh, my library doesn't do that or whatever. It doesn't hurt to just ask and to put on the radar, or ask your administration, like, hey, does this person do this? And give them that idea if they're supposed to be doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. It looked better on the small screen. Seeing it.
I like your attitude, Leslie.
I was channeling that one Mongolian queen who inspired.
It's like a reincarnation, probably.
Yeah.
Your face is the exact same from the first time.
Yeah. Just thank you guys so much. I hope, hearing our lessons, hearing everyone else's lessons, I think as teachers, it's what can we bring back to the classroom? What's real? What's tangible? And hopefully, either something you heard from your peer, from us. I hope you walk away with something you can either use for yourself or bring back to a colleague. And that's all. That's what this whole experience is all about. Is like learning from each other and building on each other. So thank you. Yes.
I really want to thank all of you for, first of all, for being here for this weekend to share this experience, and also to thank you all for all of your support of our programs over the years. People have asked me, how do I get to be on this program, or how do I get to do it? And I think over the years, Cheri and I were saying we're going on 20 years. Our 20th anniversary is next year. So we're thinking it's going to be really good. So I'm already brainstorming, and I've mentioned to some of you some of my ideas for next year, because I know Consul General Monk-Batar was very disappointed that we weren't able to bring the Mongolian teachers here for them to meet you, to see your classes, and to learn about what we're doing in California schools. So what he proposed is that we bring you back to Mongolia to talk about what you do and try to do some training. And so we're sort of talking to Maggie from ACMS, and I'm brainstorming a program. I'm thinking that the topic will be restoration and innovation. So you can sort of think about that theme and how it might apply to learning about a country like Mongolia, where if you look at some of the ancient monasteries, they've had to restore what's there. And so you have that part of the restoration of certain areas and of their culture and art. But then if you go to Ulaanbaatar and you see the cranes going up and down, and all of the building going on, the infrastructure, and how far out of the city now is, the brand new airport and all of the other infrastructure that's going on. There's a lot of innovation going on there. They're trying to develop their film industry. They're trying to develop their technology industry and all of the other areas. So there are some interesting things happening in Mongolia that I think are interesting for us to look at, but also think about how do you bring that part of the world back to your students here in California, so that they can think about what's their role in the world and what's the role of others and what are they doing. So I'm just sort of in the brainstorming phase, but those of you who have traveled with us, especially in this room, you're sort of my guiding light. When I visit your classrooms and listen to your lessons and think about how you're already teaching your students about what you're doing, you're the ones that sort of help me think about, okay, what's my next move? And what can we do? Because, what would Heidi be doing in her library? What would Peter be doing in his classroom? What animation can Steve do for us? And so I know all of you, Cheri and I have visited your classrooms, and you're incredible teachers. You do more with the lessons that many teachers would even consider doing. And you do it all because of the kinds of teachers that you are and the creativity that you bring to your schools. So we always talk about if we could start our own school, you'd probably be part of our staff because we know that we would have the best school in California. No, you're right. We couldn't. You're not going to volunteer. So, but I just wanted to thank you for that and tell you that that's sort of how we're thinking about as we go along, because our center also is going to be celebrating its 10th anniversary. 2027, that will be our innovation period as we start our next decade. And it'll be the 20th year celebration of the Summer Institute that we started in 2007. So I just wanted to thank all of you and think about what we're doing. Thank some of our special guests, Peter Van Houten and Nancy Lim, who have been so helpful to us and support us. And so I learned from Peter when I was a student. He was just a child, but
I was going to say, I taught school before any of you were born.
Yes, Nancy?
Not what he said. I wish I was in the classroom with all these teachers here. Talk about a new way of teaching. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Appreciate all of the time and effort that our speakers put together to make this event possible. So this is actually the first time that the Summer Institute has tried to do a whole workshop like this. So, and again, a welcome to Angar Seren Odku, Dr. Odku, as our new visiting scholar. So we're happy to see you and hope that you will invite us to Mongolia next year so that we can spend time in your wonderful library and learn from you too. Yeah, and special thanks to Courtney for coming to help Jillian. So she did a great job. So thank you so much. So and thank you to Maria in the back, who is one of our students here at Berkeley and has been helping us. And so and then of course to Frank in the back, our program director, and Sanjat. So you did a lot. So and then our wonderful Mandy, who is our photographer. So you can look for Mandy's videos on our YouTube channel, and then also we have videos of Leslie, Kimberly, and Amy from when we visited their classrooms after the 2004 program. We were able to videotape them doing the lesson, and so you can take a look at those YouTube videos to see what they did. I wish we could have come around to all of your classes, because I know then we'd have an incredible repository of wonderful lessons. But to give you sort of an example of what teachers do with their lessons, you can take a look at what's there. And I know a lot of you after the program have done some interesting things, have written some great grants, and so if you wanted to share those with the rest of the group, then that would be wonderful, because I think I'm so proud of all of you to do not just our program, but then to go on and do additional things and apply for other programs. And so you guys are wonderful. Okay, so thank you.